My name is Warren. I'm an addict. Yeah, I'm really, really, really nervous. I mean, I'm sweating, my heart is racing. It's interesting because I'm quite used to speaking in public, but this feels completely different. And I resisted the urge to do what I did last year, which was to prepare a cheat sheet that summarized my life in one page. And I'm just going to try to speak this time. So I hope it doesn't come out a mess. I went into the house on the hill 2 years ago, just over 2 years ago, on the 14th of June. So the 16th of June is my actual clean date. And my life since then has been completely different than it was before. And I guess this is an opportunity to try and share what it was like before, what happened, and where things are at right now. So I'll try and follow that simple format, and I'm going to try not to spend too much time talking about how it was, because I think everybody has a version of how it was, and I think for most of us it was a very dark place, and there were lots of similarities. But I will give a bit of an outline of it. Just to say one thing, my substance of choice was pretty much always alcohol, but I think it's appropriate that I'm sharing at an NA meeting because, well, for one thing, alcohol is a drug, and I think lots of us have problems with it, but for another, NA was my first exposure to recovery and to the 12-step program about 10 years ago, so it's really nice to be sharing in an NA meeting. Okay, I was born in Durban just over 40 years ago to pretty normal family. My father died when I was about 18 months old. I was raised by my mother and her parents. I had a very sheltered childhood. I was always kind of a weird child. I am, I think, innately perfectionist and control freak. I think the disease is something that's been with me from the beginning. I don't think I picked it up along the way. I think I had it from the beginning. I remember before going to primary school, I spent the school holidays after pre-primary school making sure I knew how to read properly. So, because I was anxious that I wouldn't be able to do it well enough when I got there. That kind of stuff. The need to fit in, the need to be better, and then always this feeling of being on the outside. And I used to think that feeling of being on the outside had to do with being gay, or had to do with not being particularly good at sports and stuff, or had to do with being more intellectual. But I think a big part of that feeling on the outside had to do with this disease, with addiction. I never felt part of or connected, so I overcompensated with a whole lot of other things, particularly academics, and I never really connected well with people. I had a few close-ish small groups of friends throughout the whole of my school career. My mother got married when I was about 11 to a man who was quite an abusive alcoholic, and for a very long time I used that experience. He was a bit physically abusive, but mostly he was just really verbally vicious. I used that experience of kind of rejection as my reason for why I was so fucked up for a very long time. And it took me, I think I was in my 30s before I realized that kind of once you're over 18, you can no longer really blame your parents for how your life's turned out, especially not once you're like 15 years past 18. So I eventually dropped that story, but it took a long time, and I drank on that for a long time. I think I started feeling like I fitted in, and this is also linked to the first drinking experience when I was at university. I'd had like a few sips of wine or a few sips of beer up till then, but I'd always been very focused on trying to be good, on trying to be accepted. So I hadn't drunk before university, not really. At university, I met a whole lot of other people who were also kind of weird and a bit different, and I got much more involved in social stuff, and with that came a lot of alcohol, and I realized very quickly that made me feel normal and connected. And I was then devoted to it for the next 18 years, pretty much. It started out with just sort of weekends. I was part of the university newspaper. We used to drink throughout the layout process, which made layout interesting. And yeah, I think I remember by the time I was in third year, I was I remember sitting outside an exam with a box of red wine and a glass, trying to get my head around statistics, and failing, obviously. I didn't actually, I kind of got through university. I graduated, I passed somehow or other. But by the time I was finished with my university career, I was like well confirmed as an addict. I couldn't survive without drinking. By the time I was 21, which was maybe a year after I left university, I had my first experience of rehab. A rehab center in Durban that I returned to 4 or 5 times. I say 4 or 5 times because I actually can't remember. It was like, go in there, go through their 21-day program, feel better, make a conscious decision that it's going to be the end of it, it's going to be different from now, go out, last for a few weeks or a month, and then relapse and start the cycle again. So that never really changed anything for me. Although I'm not ungrateful for that center, because I think there were times where if I hadn't had that place to go, I might not have survived that 20 years. I avoided getting into relationships, mainly because when I was at university, during the period where I was trying to decide gay, straight, bi, that popular inner conversation that lots of people that are sexually confused go through, I was involved in a long-term relationship with a woman. It ended very badly. It ended inevitably because she moved to Cape Town and I stayed in Durban. It was also finished long before we actually ended it because my drinking had taken a serious toll on the relationship. We were both tired of it, and within a day of her going to Cape Town and me staying behind in Durban, we'd cheated on each other. Her with another man, me with another man, which of course we never told each other about. She told me about hers, and I used that, her infidelity, and I used that as a stick to beat her for months. And I went into a deep depression and spent like 3 months doing nothing but drink over a relationship that was already finished, a relationship that was kind of hollow from the beginning. It was another reason to give myself permission to go on this kind of self-destructive binge. And that's been the pattern throughout, not just with relationships, but with anything. A lot of relapses over the years happened because I took a work assignment that I then didn't feel I could complete, so I relapsed over that. Or a family member died, and I didn't feel anything, but it was a good excuse to relapse, and I relapsed over that. So the cause has never been the cause. The trigger's never been the trigger. My own need to, I suppose, not feel so disconnected and to stop feeling what I was feeling has always been what's driven my drinking, my using. After that mess with the university relationship, I avoided relationships for a really long time. I spent quite a lot of years in and out of therapy with some very good therapists who could do nothing with me because I couldn't ever really get honest with them, I think. And it was only about, and there were meaningless relationships in between. There were relationships that were just about sex, or there were relationships that were just convenient. It's only in the last 6 years or so that it started to be possible to get into real relationships. And that only happened really after I found NA. About 7 years ago, I was really sick and really tired, and I'd been in a 3-month binge. My pattern was to stop drinking for 3-4 months, and then to have a weekend of drinking, which would then turn into a week of drinking, which would then turn into 3 months of full-on hide in the house, close all the curtains, just go out to get alcohol, alternate the bottle stores so that I didn't go to the same one again and again. That was kind of the pattern for about 10 years. Eventually, that got really tired, and I was really quite sick. And someone suggested I go to NA, or I think I called the helpline, and I found the person that was my sponsor for a few years. I started the program. I started working the steps. I felt better. I got to like step 6 or 7, but I really didn't understand any of what I was doing. I was answering the questions in that green and gold book as honestly as I could, at great length. That poor sponsor sat through an 8-hour step 5, an 8-hour marathon step 5 of sharing my hugely self-indulgent step 4. So yeah, he was a very patient man. But I kind of didn't get it. I didn't get that it was about, that this wasn't just another therapy process, that this was about changing something fundamental about me, about doing something different. I thought it would be enough to write the answers and talk to my sponsor without changing anything in me. And so it didn't work, ultimately. After about 11 months clean, after I'd met my current fiance, because I'm getting married at the end of July, I relapsed, and that was the beginning of a series of relapses. When I'd relapse, I would come back to the program, and that's, I think, the program, even though I did make some of the last few years of my fiance's life really miserable, the fact that I at least had some connection to NA was why I still have that relationship, because I didn't sink into complete insanity until the very end. I don't think I want to do a whole blow-by-blow account of what's happened in that relationship. I was absent for a lot of it. I was locked in a bedroom, either getting drunk or trying to get out of being drunk. It was like having a non-life. In lots of ways, the time of active drinking for me was not being alive. I would either be working obsessively to try and make up for the time I'd been drinking, or else I'd be drinking obsessively just to try and stop being. That was my whole life for about 18 years. Just over 2 years ago, the usual thing happened. Big deadline, felt inadequate, decided I needed to escape, got drunk. That continued for 3 or 4 weeks, by the end of which I thought I was living in an episode of Supernatural. I'm not quite sure why it was supernatural, because I think I'd been watching it obsessively while drinking. But I believed that the upstairs neighbor was some kind of mythical creature. I had threatened to kill myself. I had what I thought were reasonable conversations with my partner about suicide. And he convinced me that doing something about this would be a good idea, and I came into the house on the hill, which was, I think, the most important decision I ever made. I'd heard about the house on the hill over the previous 5 or 6 years from my then sponsor, who had been there as well. And I had a sense that if I went there, something would really have to change, which is partly why it took me such a long time to get there. Because a big part of me didn't really want to change. I just wanted to keep on this same familiar, if sad, path. There were a few moments there that felt really significant to me. There was a moment when I checked in, and I think it was Brian who said to me, "You look really tired." And I was, yeah, I'm really tired of this. And I was really tired of myself by the time I got there. There was another moment when the person who became my counselor said, "If you do this, you never have to drink again." And I'd never believed that statement before. And I believed it for the first time when she told me that. And then there was a moment when I was heading towards doing step 2, where for the first time someone explained to me that the steps were things you lived rather than wrote. That if I was going to practice step 2, I had to let go of my need to try and manage the financial situation and the fact that I couldn't pay the bills at the treatment center, and do what I could and trust that it would work out. And it kind of miraculously did work out. There were ways of, somebody actually offered to pay for the treatment for me and I could pay them back. And I was able to be there for a full 3-month period, which I knew from the beginning I would have to. I knew that if I treated it as a quick fix, it wouldn't do it for me. And then another really key moment, I think, was telling my life story to a group of 20 other people, 20 other addicts, and being told that I actually wasn't a poor, abused victim, but that I was manipulative and arrogant, and that I'd created this reality. And I could see that most of what they were saying was true. It kind of got through. That moment, I think, was a really important moment for me in committing to this program. And I'm forever grateful to the people who were part of that moment. Because the gift of the truth there is probably the biggest gift that I got in my whole time in treatment. I've heard people say that treatment is you go to treatment and you get broken down and then built back up. And that's not my experience at all. I think what gets broken, if it works, is your illusions about who you are, so that you can see what's real. Because I think I lived in delusion and illusion for pretty much my whole life. The illusion of being a victim, the illusion of being less than, the illusion of being better than, smarter than, lesser, whatever, all that crap. I think what I found in treatment was some connection with something that's closer to the truth. I don't know if we ever get all the way to the truth, but something that was more honest, that sees that I'm not in control of everything that happens, that I'm not God. I was told that a few times, which was helpful, and that actually I don't have to take responsibility for anything but my part in situations. And that was hugely freeing for me, because I'd always tried to, in my delusions, had always tried to take responsibility for everything, and then felt crushed when I failed. So I think a lot of stuff shifted for me in treatment. And I don't think it would have shifted without being in that place for 3 months in an intensive process. I'm hugely grateful that I was privileged to have that opportunity, because a lot of people don't. And I think my journey has also been made a lot easier by the support of family and friends and others that a lot of other people don't have. So I'm very grateful for that. After leaving Cedars, sorry, I know I'm not supposed to do that. I should say I'm very, very tired and quite stressed out at the moment. Not just by this, but by the fact that my life was really empty before coming into recovery and is now maybe a little bit too full. But I'll get there. The year after treatment started fairly slowly. I came out. My partner and I managed to stay together through my drinking. I think sometimes that he would have done better to basically get rid of me earlier on in the process, but I'm really grateful he didn't. I think we've grown a huge amount through the last few years. I moved out of the treatment center and into a new house that we share in Kingsborough. And we were then renovating it, so I spent the first few months managing contractors, and then while I was in treatment, an old client of mine had come back to me. I told them honestly what was going on, and they'd offered me a 3-year contract, which is what I'm still working on. And it involves traveling to 5 or 6 other African countries quite regularly. So then I started the kind of rhythm of 2 weeks away from home, 2 weeks back home. And normally, in the past, while I was still drinking or sober but not in recovery, I would have found that unbearable. Because I used to have this thing that, like, airports are second only to hell. And I used to find them hugely stressful. And somehow, after treatment, that stuff's kind of in perspective. It's a luxury problem. It's a thing that maybe isn't a huge amount of fun, but it's not a big issue anymore. I'm finding I can do a lot more than I could do before, because I don't take it all so seriously, and because I recognize that and that I'm not going to be perfect. So I think I've taken quite a lot more perspective away from the experience. The biggest thing that I took from the experience of treatment, and the thing that's carried me through the last 2 years, is God, I suppose. And I use that word, I say I suppose, because one of the things that makes the program work for me is that it isn't the Catholic God that I was raised with. It's my own understanding. And my own understanding of God is something gentle and enormous, and something that contains all of us. Something that makes stuff work, I suppose. That contact with that, a sense of being part of something that's bigger than myself, that matters more than just little me, is what gives perspective, and it's what also makes all of this possible. In the last year, I've turned 40, I've got engaged to be married. I'm I've managed to do things that I could never do before without relapsing. And I don't think I could do that without some sense of contact with a higher power, with something bigger than myself. I also now, the experience of being in the house for 3 months, I didn't think I could do that. I thought the idea of being with like 40 normal people trapped in a house for 3 months might drive me insane, but 40 addicts, like the thought of it was terrifying. And it was wonderful. It was like being part of a community for the first time ever. And that's something that I've never allowed myself to have. And I think one of the things that is different now is that I recognize that I can have that. And I do have that more with colleagues, with friends, with people in the fellowship. Feels to me, I suppose recovery feels like, it's kind of like a golden thread that started being introduced into my life in the house on the hill, and that I need to maintain over time. And the minimum ways I maintain that are by prayer, which I do daily, by contact with my sponsor, by coming to meetings as often as I can, and I should do that more often. And sometimes that thread is very strong, and sometimes it's a bit frayed at the edges. Right now, it feels a bit frayed at the edges. In just over a month, we're getting married. We're at a stage in my work where there's a whole lot of stuff happening that's very complicated, and it's happening in 7 countries at the same time, and it's very stressful. And normally, I would not come and try and do this, share this stuff, at a time when everything else feels a bit crazy. I think what the program's given me is the ability to come here and do this at a time when everything is a bit crazy. And I don't actually think I have a lot more to say. I know that everything that I've got now, a career, good relationships, the opportunity to make amends to my mother, I haven't talked about, but who went through hell during my drinking, who always tried to help me, and who I'm now finally able to give back to by helping her out financially, by helping her with questions about retirement, by being available to her, being there for her. My partner, who I'm trying to make amends to by being present for, by hopefully being a good partner to. My friends I actually stay in contact with now rather than vanishing. I mean, there's a lot of richness in my life now that could never have been there before, just because I didn't have a life before. I think I've heard people say we in recovery can go to the world. For me, recovery is what makes it possible for me to be in the world, because without it, I couldn't. Without it, I had to run from everything constantly, because I was basically terrified all the time. And that's not true anymore. And I actually don't know what else to say. I think that's kind of the essence of it, yeah. Except to say thank you. Have I said thank you to you? Except to say, a year ago when I shared, just under a year ago, I shared in July at the Karisak, and I said that I hadn't had a sponsor for about 3 months because something had happened in that relationship. And I was promptly lectured by several people, including some counselors from the House on the Hill, that I had to get a sponsor. And I got Wendy, and I'm very, very grateful for you having been with me over the last year. It's made a huge difference in my life. And just you're always there, and you know everyone's name, which is helpful. Yeah, that's it. Thank you very much.